How do you recruit and retain great staff? What does great culture look like? How do you have difficult conversations? The Supporting Leaders podcast connects with leaders in the field to gain insights into these leadership challenges and beyond. Enjoy the show. Today's podcast guest is Dr. Cameron Stockdale, and this interview is phenomenal. And I would say too, if you are anybody who is managing change in any way in an organization, this is a must listen. So before I get into the interview with him, let me read a little bit about his background. Cameron is currently the president and CEO of Work Wellness Institute, leading the organization's ongoing growth and research knowledge mobilization efforts. As CEO, Cameron's responsibility is to support the vision for the organization through in-depth strategic planning and sound financial management to leverage business opportunities. Previously, Cameron spent 25 years in emergency health services, and he retired as the Operations Superintendent. After his paramedic career, he worked in various management and executive roles within healthcare and research organizations. He has several degrees. He has a Master's of Arts in Leadership. He has an interdisciplinary doctoral degree. He has a postgraduate certificate in organizational behavior from Harvard, and he is currently completing a Master of Law degree at University of Edinburgh focused on innovation and technology. Again, this is an interview you don't want to miss, so enjoy the interview and find more information about Cameron. You can find him on LinkedIn. Thanks and enjoy. So we have Dr. Cameron Stockdale with us this afternoon. And Cameron, can I call you Cameron, or is it going to be Dr. Stockdale?
You can call me Cam, actually. That works.
Okay, well. Perfect. Okay, so Cam, we were talking a little bit before the show about your educational journey, and you kind of had these like two different career journeys that you've been on. And so one of the things we were just talking about was pursuing your doctorate degree and how that would open doors for you. So I'm curious to ask you, from the healthcare perspective, have you found that advanced degree has opened doors for you?
I think what the doctoral program did for me was actually lead me in a direction almost away from healthcare, because it did open so many doors. I never really envisioned myself in the role that I am now in leading a research institute. It wasn't the direction that I was heading. I started the doctoral program because I had visions of sort of more executive roles in a healthcare setting. But my personal interest that I developed along the way in the doctoral program, they sent me in another direction, and another path. And I think that was one of the real benefits of taking the doctoral program, is that I use the term all the time, it kicks down doors for you. And you get to walk through the door that you choose. And so my personal interest sort of aligned very well with the organizational's mandate here. And without the doctoral degree, I certainly wouldn't be in the position I am now today. So.
Yeah. So tell us what position do you serve in now, and tell us a little bit about the Wellness Institute.
So I'm the president and CEO of the Work Wellness Institute. And what we try to do is we try to be the knowledge hub for good academic research around work wellness and disability prevention issues. So we're branded as the Work Wellness Institute, but we have a very large mandate covering a lot of areas around occupational health and safety issues, primarily. And then we have a number of grants and projects that look at helping those with disabilities, whether it be mental health challenges or with mobility issues, getting them into the workplace, and getting employers or industry ready to bring people with those kinds of issues into the workplace and provide valuable employment for them. So we have two arms of the organization. One is the sort of the research side of it, and we'll either do the research ourselves or work with academics around the world to produce research in those areas. And the second arm of the organization is the knowledge mobilization piece. So turning those into useful tools, practical tools of programming. and whether or not universities want to use our research in developing their curriculum, or we do the programming ourselves. It's just the best way to mobilize that information and get it used out there. So that's what we do.
That's really interesting. I'm curious with regards to leadership and thinking about work wellness, or even just, like I like how you talked about preventing, certain things from happening, or whether it's being preventative or proactive. Are there things that continue to pop up in the research as far as quality leadership, or how leaders need to tune into some of those issues?
Yeah, our organization, just as I was coming on board here, we just finished what we refer to as the psychosocial hazard report, and that's looking at issues in the workplace. You know, items or issues around things like change management and the stress and anxiety that causes in people, and there's a reoccurring theme that keeps coming up in the literature and in the research. And that's the importance and the impact of strong leadership and what you can do to minimize a lot of those those psychosocial hazards in the workplace. Um, when you invited me on to talk in this podcast, I actually went back and listened to a number of the other podcasts that you had done. And there's this reoccurring theme often, and it's about communication, right? It's about understanding your employees. It's understanding who they are, what their individual issues are. And it's just this reoccurring theme. And I think when you look at the research that was done by our organization in that psychosocial hazard report, leaders have a huge impact in managing those issues in the workplace. And it can't be understated, the impact on managing those risks for employees. It's about giving things like performance feedback. It's about supplying training for employees. It's about making sure that they understand what their roles are in the workplace. And it's understanding that it's your job as a leader to mitigate the risks that are associated with some of the stresses that they have on them. So individuals approach a situation, they're emotional about it. Your job as a leader or as a supervisor is to understand what that is, understand what those issues are, and then work with them, support them to mitigate those risks so that they're comfortable in their job, they're comfortable in the role that they have. So yes, leadership from a work wellness perspective, good leadership is invaluable.
Yeah, I'd like to ask you a little bit more about that, because was your dissertation on change management?
So my dissertation looked at leading change in the Canadian healthcare system. And what I really focused on was creating the environment, or how do you get employees in a healthcare system to make this decision to support change? And for me, it was the reason I came up with this topic is that I had lived through some pretty significant organizational change in my previous role. We at one time we were under the Ministry of Health in the province here, and after a number of sort of labor relations issues, and there was some political involvement, we were moved under something called the Provincial Health Services Authority, and that was a massive change because we were moved and changed from what was an emergency service as an ambulance service. And we were moved and tried to make us a more healthcare related organization. So you can imagine taking 3,500 to 4,000 employees and just kind of change the entire culture of the organization. And at the time, I just didn't feel that it was going well. And I think we all know that change is something that the objective of change most often fails, right? I think that's what the research says, depending upon what you read, anywhere from 70 to 80% of the time. And so it was this real interest to me on how you could get somebody such as myself or my colleagues to support that decision. Because I really thought that this wasn't a change for the better, it was a change for the worse. And it sort of made me realize that there's this kind of rational theory of decision making that was implemented sort of from the top down, which was there was just an assumption that this change was going to be better. And then, the employees, the rank and file employees didn't feel that way. And that it didn't align with our values. Our values were, we were an emergency service, patient care was paramount, and we didn't see that those changes really aligned to what we believed in. And I think that that's why it was so difficult. Anyway, that's what led me down the path of doing my dissertation on change management in the healthcare system.
Yeah, so take us back to, you're living in that scenario. If you're a, let's say middle level kind of manager, so you didn't create the change, but it's a part of your job to help, lead your staff through some of the change. What did some of them do that would have been effective, or what could have some of them done that would have been effective to support their staff in moving in this direction and still support the, ultimate end goal of the organization?
Yeah, I think mid-level managers or supervisors, anybody at that level, it goes back to that, the opportunities for communication. So when I was interviewing the participants in the study, what really came back was that they just didn't know what was going on. That there's this magic silver bullet of information. Somebody sent out a letter or an email, and that was supposed to answer everybody's questions. And what people really do is they look at it from an emotional perspective, and how was this going to affect me at the time? So, some of the people I was interviewing, they were saying, I have organized to pick up my children at 9:00 every morning, and these changes won't allow me to pick up my kids. So it has this negative impact, and they're very emotional on how it would affect their life. Like, what do I do with my kids? And that stress, those kind of things were the issues that really caused them to make this decision about whether they're supporting those changes in the organization or not. So at a supervisory level, when we talk about communication, it's understanding that impact on your employee, and being trusted that you will attempt to mitigate those negative impacts. So when you go back to this whole trust related issue, one of the things that I found was really interesting, if you were a leader or a manager that had a history of failure with change, where you did not protect your employees, where you didn't mitigate those issues, you were not trusted. And you were pretty much guaranteed to have that objective of change. It was going to fail on you because nobody trusted you to look out for their best interests. So it was this whole combination of things where you really need to provide information to your staff, be really open to the point of being vulnerable. Tell them everything that you know, understanding what their issues are, and trying to mitigate it, and being trusted to mitigate those issues for staff at the time. And in that way, they can make some decisions about supporting the change that's happening in the larger organization.
This is really good. And, and you're in that situation that kind of led you into that with your dissertation. Obviously, that was a huge change. I'm curious, in your opinion, are organizations just continually going through change? Or do we ever get in a place with organizations where there's some stability and it's not just this constant flux of change?
Well, if I think back to the research that I did, in the healthcare system, one of the things that everybody talked about was that it was an organization of perpetual projects. It was just constantly ongoing, and that created a sense of uncertainty sometimes. I think given the context that we live in today, where technological change or even the environment like we see in COVID, it demands a level of constant change that's happening. But I think a constant high level of change where people are always uncertain causes, and we talk about work wellness, some of that anxiety, some of those issues in the workplace. So as a leader, as a person in the role that I am now, what my goal is to implement change in kind of a measured approach. Yes, there's a large project that we need done, but then I need to give staff a bit of a break where they can sort of get set, ground themselves, understand, the clarity of their role, what they're doing in the workplace. I need to provide training for them because that certainly helps. And then once we hit that sort of base level of stability, then we can move on to the next project. And I think that seems like a reasonable approach these days in the environment that we're currently functioning in.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I was going to ask that too. So in our current environment with the pandemic, is that coming up in your research right now too? I mean, so you talked about stress and anxiety that naturally comes with change. But now that we're living in the world that we're living in, and everyone has been impacted by this in some way or another, has that heightened what's happening when we try and manage change or what's happening in the workplace?
I think there's a number right now that talks about somewhere in the neighborhood of 40 to 41% of adults are saying that this pandemic is negatively affecting their mental health, and even more so in ethnic communities. Right, the impact is quite significant. Um, and the impact on the workplace, it from my perspective, my role now is to try and, I'll use that term again, mitigate that impact on my employees. And how I go about doing that, it's creating some very simple rules for our organization. And that is their health and safety is number one. And I will do everything in my power to look after their health and safety. For us, that means we are working from home. Right? And I have no expectation that they're going to be coming into the office. It also means some flexibility that we have to implement. So we talk about that we have core hours in the organization that, I want to see people working from generally the hours of 10 to 3 so that we can communicate online. But I want people to have the flexibility that when they wake up in the morning and they're just like, I just can't get out of bed for an hour, I need another hour's sleep, that they can do that to look after their mental health. I think that it's up to myself and my leadership team to sort of model healthy behaviors for our staff. So, I'll often get on the computer and say to staff, hey, listen, it's sunny outside in Vancouver in the wintertime. That doesn't happen very often. Everybody go for a walk for an hour. Just get outside and take some of those breaks and trying to model some of that behavior. I've let employees go to other provinces for a month. They need a change of scenery. It doesn't matter to me whether or not they're working from home on a computer or they're working on the other side of the country on the computer. So for their mental health, let's be flexible. Let them go and do that. So I think those are the kind of things that we're implementing here in the organization to try and look after people. And then that's our responsibility, I think, as a leader.
I love that. Okay, so I just thought of this. Do you think that in Canada, do you think organizations are a little bit more in tune and flexible with some of that than we are down here in the States?
I think it's an individual thing.
Yeah.
I would imagine, yes. Everybody that I went to school with at Creighton, they're probably quite knowledgeable that they may, if they're in a position, if they're in decision-making roles and have that authority, I'm sure they all know how to do it. I don't think it's unique to Canada. I think we have a slightly different approach in Canada on how our politics are functioning these days, and we're not trying to necessarily weaponize issues around COVID. It's generally perceived as a health emergency, and we're trying to look after one another. And I think that makes it easier, right? And I'm not fighting the politics of whether you should wear a mask or whether or not COVID is real. It's generally accepted that I don't want to say we're in this boat together because some people have sort of different thresholds, but it's a collective issue that we're trying to address and fight. So yeah. I don't have to deal with those kind of being on the other side of the border.
Yeah. So speaking of a pandemic and your career as a paramedic, I think that you've had some opportunities to manage or lead through different things, whether it's a riot or major tragedies. Are there similarities between how you lead through those major events and scenarios to day, or are there big differences in how your leadership needs to be flexible?
I guess I'm a big believer in your leadership needs to match the situation that you're currently in. Um, in 2011, as a Canadian, it was a proud moment. We were in the Stanley Cup hockey final, and Vancouver lost. And at the end of that game 7 loss, there was a full scale riot that happened in Vancouver for a variety of reasons, but it was a significant riot. And I remember pulling all of our staff out of the downtown core of Vancouver and setting them up in sort of a secure location next to one of the hospitals. And I had made the decision that we were not responding into the event because it was just too dangerous for my staff. And we were getting reports of, people being stabbed and, beaten, and buildings on fire with people in it. It was a tough call from a leadership perspective. And I remember standing at one point in front of a group of about 40 paramedics and giving a speech. And my speech was about, my job is to make sure that you're safe. I will not send you into this riot without being sure that you're going to be safe. And if I can't do that, you're not turning a wheel. You're not jumping on your bike, because we had bike squads, or in the ambulance and going. And that was a real learning experience for me. I saw fear in people's eyes. And so, I can translate that into today when I have staff who say, I've got a health related issue. I'm scared to go into the office. My job, again, is to say to them, listen, my job is to support you. My job is to ensure that you're safe. And unless I can ensure that, you don't have to come to the office. So there is some reoccurring threads. Certainly, as a leader in an ambulance service, you're dealing with like raw emotions sort of more often. You deal with a human tragedy, you deal with a horrific call, and you're having to deal with the aftermath with the paramedic who's upset, who is crying because of the tragedy that they just dealt with. You don't often deal with that raw emotion in the office like that. And then in an ambulance service, you sometimes have to be a little bit more authoritarian, where the apartment building is on fire and you have 25 patients and you're just barking out orders as to where people need to go and stand and where to go. You don't necessarily have to do that in an office setting. But like I said, there are some reoccurring themes that you would extract about looking after people, just their opposite ends of the spectrum, I guess.
Yeah, and I would venture to maybe say, you'll have to tell me if I'm right or wrong, but it seems like you have your personal values when it comes to leadership really set in place, because that health and safety of your people, you talked about that in your current role and talked about that then. Do you think that there's something to that like you've decided that is important? And I would venture to maybe guess, no matter where your career journey took you, that would remain constant number one for you. Would that be accurate?
I think so. I think the way that I function as a leader is that I have this internal checklist. So as a leader in the ambulance service, this may sound a little bit funny, but I called it the sniff test, right? And the sniff test was, if the media ever got a hold of this, what would be the criticism? And so, what I do now, it's similar, but what I say to myself is, if I was in that person's shoes, how would this reflect? What would I look like in the decisions that I was making? So a slightly different sniff test, but that's kind of the value that I hold, that it's a checklist that I ensure that I go through when I'm managing those decisions that you're trying to make about how to deal with a particular issue. Certainly, I have my own values, and it's being a leader that I would want to work for. Right, that's kind of the approach that I take. I have maybe a unique perspective, and that I'm okay to let people fail in this organization as long as you've put an effort forward. So that's a little different than what we had in an ambulance service, that in many respects is a no-fail kind of organization. You can't drop the patient on the ground, but here you can make a mistake and you can learn from it. And the reason that I have that perspective, and it's so strong, I think, in me, is that nobody's going to die here by making a mistake, right? So it's just this the perspective and focus that I have about how critical the work that we do on a daily basis. Yes, it's important, and yes, we're trying to impact people's lives, but to make a mistake and miss a deadline because you were so busy, it's not the end of the world. And so that's my leadership approach to working here.
Yeah, Cam, this talk has been so insightful to me, even just thinking about my own leadership journey and how much of this is applicable to me. And that's one of the things, people have probably heard me say this a million times, but one of the things that I really enjoyed about the program at Creighton that we went through, you and I were in different cohorts. This is the first time we've met, but I think that's part of that Creighton community where you're connected on social media and you know that you can reach out and connect with somebody. But I think that idea of that we were in class with people who were in the healthcare industry, who were in military, who were in education, just collectively made this conversation about leadership so fascinating. And listening to you talk and your background and experiences, it's so relevant to what I'm going through right now in my organization. And I just appreciate so much you sharing some of your wisdom and insight. So my last question, Cam, if you've listened to some of the podcasts, you know it's coming, but what do you know for sure about leadership?
What do I know for sure? That you're never finished learning about it. I think that you're always gaining new experiences. You're always, in my case, it seems to you're always going back to school to learn more. I think every day you add to that collective wisdom about leadership and how to handle situations. So I didn't finish a doctoral program and think I knew everything about leadership. I looked at that and I thought, I have a base level of knowledge, and it allows me to build and be even better at it. And I think that's the only thing I would say that I know about leadership at this point, is that it's a journey that we're all still on.
Yeah, it's so reassuring, because I think sometimes you look at people in these leadership roles and just assume that they know everything and they've got it together. And so I think it's reassuring to hear that you've never truly arrived. There's always room to grow. So Cam, thank you so much for being on the show. I appreciate your time and all of your wise words and experiences that you've shared with us today.
Here you'll find links to the YouTube versions of our interviews and links to the podcast. You'll also find articles on leadership. To join in on the conversation, find the Supporting Leaders group on Facebook and find us on Instagram at Supporting Leaders.